Hello, BookTube. It's Friday, bright sunny Friday here in Boston. That's time for Friday Reads. BookTube tradition where people stop what they're doing and give a little thumbnail report on the stuff they've read recently, the stuff they're working on now, and the stuff they're going to read right down the line. I love watching Friday Reads videos and I love to participate in them too. I thought this video I would give you just a few books that I have read this week. This was a very, very good reading week for me. I've had a string of really good reading weeks for 2023. I think if it stays this way, 2023 will probably be a really good reading year. I thought I'd go through these, just a handful of them, and talk a little bit about what I thought of them. Maybe some of them will be of interest to you. The first one is by Richard Norton Smith. This is an author I really like. This is his new book, An Ordinary Man. The first really good biography of Gerald Ford that I have ever read. I think I've read them all. I had a mixed reaction to this book, as I did for a lot of the books on this list, because although it's really good, this author is terrific. His books are fantastic. This one is no exception. He seems to want to like Gerald Ford, or to have come to like him during the course of writing the book. And I don't deny that Gerald Ford was a likable guy. Everybody liked him. Even the Simpsons liked him. But I think that hampers this book in some ways. I kept being frustrated with it now and again at points when, especially when Ford comes to power. This figure is going to be known in history for two main things. My conspiracy theorist friends will say that the only thing history is going to know him for is that he was on the Warren Commission, but he's going to be known for two main things. One is that he was our first unelected president. Our lifetimes will see that precedent shattered, and we will see other examples of that, but they won't be as benign as this. And the second is that he pardoned Richard Nixon. He gave Richard Nixon a blanket full pardon for everything that he had ever done wrong, and that was a lot. that torpedoed Ford's approval ratings with the American public, guaranteed that he would not be elected president again, or elected president the first time and serve out, a full term of his own. And I really like this book. I can wholeheartedly recommend it, but I thought it pulled its punches. When I was done with it, the conflicting impression I had was that I kind of wished there were some other book to deal with. And in modern, a 21st century biography of Gerald Ford, I think we still need one. And even though this is really good, I think we still need one. Then this next one was a reread. I often allow the Amazon or the tablet I've got thousands of ebooks on this thing. I often just allow random chance to determine a reread. And this isn't completely random chance because I'm coming up on a reread of a book connected with this. But I reread Dan Simmons' big book, Ilium, which is part one of a two-part series that he does that is, these are big books. Imagine if I had to have this on the shelf. Good Lord, I'm so glad I have an e-copy of it. But this is, the storyline part of this that you will think about when you think about this is that it's the story of the Trojan War set on Olympus Mons, on Mars. This is absolutely enormous mountain, dwarfs Mount Everest. But there's a lot more going on in this book. I, of course, concentrated on that Trojan War element because every year in June I reread the Iliad. And this time around I didn't. This time around I concentrated on all the other stuff going on in this book. All of the characters, either well or poorly sketched. The ecological parable back on Earth. There's a ton of stuff going on in this book aside from the Trojan War pastiche elements. And I really appreciate them a lot more. And I can't shake the impression from when this reread. I haven't read this since I first read it when it first came out. I can't shake the impression that the prose here is pitched at a different, more poetic level than anything else I've read from Dan Simmons, before this or since. And I wonder if that isn't a sign, a betrayal that these two books probably betray anyway, just given their size and subject. That this is a diehard Homer fan. I noticed that often in Homer pastiches. I even noticed it when I wrote my own, that it does something to your prose to be steeped in. I could be wrong about that. Probably some of you have favorite examples of Dan Simmons' prose that aren't in these two books, but finishing Ilium really made me want to go on to the sequel. I will probably do that this week. Then this is a new book. This is by Sandeep Johar, and this is called My Father's Brain, which is a dual story. The author is a doctor, and he writes in this book about Alzheimer's disease, about mental decline and the biology behind brain tissue degeneration, and also what medicine can do about it and what medicine might be right on the horizon of being able to do about it. But there's also the personal element of his father. succumbing to Alzheimer's. And there's a note that this is really good, terrific and heartfelt. Not at all manipulative in the way that you would expect from a book that's hauling in someone's relative who's dying of the disease they're writing about. I'm always wary about that gambit in books, but it happens in this book, but it's done perfectly, respectfully. For you, it respects you. But there's an element, a note that kept coming up throughout this book. Not sure how intentional it was on the author's part, but an element of fear that is very, very real. Most people, when they think about what Alzheimer's is, would rather get a painful cancer or die abruptly in a tragedy than have this happen to them. Most people would. And I think if most people are absolutely honest, they will say they would prefer that happened to, or that those things happen to a loved one rather than Alzheimer's too. Not just themselves, but the people around them. Because it's an incredibly cruel process. There have been many, many people writing about the weird kinds of beauties that can come from it, and this author does a really good job at that as well. But it ends up being just cruel. The person that you know and love dies, but the body keeps going, and is gradually inhabited by a different person that you either have to learn to love or not, but there's no guarantee they're going to learn to love you. It's absolutely... I read about this whenever I can. I've seldom read an account this good. I won't say that if you have Alzheimer's affecting your family, you should read this, because this might be too hard for you to read. But if you're interested in how it affects other people, you won't find a better book than this. I was reading it the whole time. I was thinking, yeah, well, I share that fear very much. I would rather have any fate than this. I don't know that I have a genetic predisposition for it, but then this book lies open the possibility that genetics aren't the only factor. I don't think I have any genetic factor for it. My mother and father's family, going back 1,000 years, have no incidents of dementia or Alzheimer's at all. They stay clear-headed right to the end, even when that's a pretty horrible fate in itself. So I might not have to worry about it. Maybe if you don't either, maybe that's the position to read this book. I think if someone you love was being affected by this disease, this might be too hard a book to read. But it's really well done. Unlike our next book, which we just got, I think, yesterday in a mail haul. This is The Rope Artist by Fuminori Nakamura, translated from the Japanese by Sam Bett. And this is it's a murder investigation. It's a police procedural, two thoroughly unlikable cops who don't like each other, and you don't like them. There's no one to root for in this book at all. I don't necessarily require that, but it does make it a slog when the author's not doing anything else. And one of the two cops has skeletons in his closet and wants to solve the murder mystery. And the other two cops has skeletons in his closet, and they're the reason he wants to solve the murder mystery, because they involve the crime and maybe the killer. And they come straight from the underground world of Japanese bondage erotica, which is huge, sprawling. That's one thing I learned from this book, is the complete size of it, the dimension of it. But the whole time that I was reading this, I was thinking, there's something here that I'm not getting. And when that is true in a work of translated literature, I usually blame the translator. I usually give the author the benefit of the doubt. But I have read many books now translated into English, written by this author, and it can't all be the translator. There are assumptions being made here that are not being shared with me. Why do any of the characters in this book act the way they do? One of the two detectives is committing fireable offenses from literally page 1. We're never given an explanation of why that is. Periodically, he will say about himself that he's a lousy detective, but that's not a good excuse. That wouldn't survive a board review, much less a whole career of them. The whole time that I was reading this, I got the impression that I always get with this author, which is that he is expecting me to understand the context of literally everything in his book to such an extent that he's not bothering to explain any of it. Imagine if somebody wrote a novel about Sex in the City and just assumed that you knew everything about Sex in the City. So at one point, or many points throughout the book, they're saying, oh, that was such a Samantha thing to do. Well, if you don't know anything about Sex in the City, that's not going to make any sense to you at all. You're not going to understand why half the characters are doing what they're doing. And that was true in this case. I read it in one gulp, and I think this is the last time that I will bother with this author. If he can do this to me over and over again, then I have to assume that the author himself, despite the acclaim and popularity that he has in Japan, is writing this way. And who can explain acclaim and popularity? I certainly can't. Then we have this is a reread like Ilium, not like Ilium at all, but it was also a reread. This is a book from the late 1990s. This is by David Lettick, and it's a novel called The Sex Squad, which I went to originally because I am currently writing for Camp NaNoWriMo what could reductively be called a sex novel. I wanted to address the subject of sex scenes in fiction head on, instead of just edging around them or simply not writing them. And I remembered that the 90s were full of, especially gay lit, that did that same thing, that addressed that kind of subject squarely. This is about the stereotypical young Adonis from the provinces, the barefoot boy with cheek of tan who gets off the bus in New York, wants to make a career in dance on the stage. And he is plunged right away into a world of older mentors and an incredibly sexually charged world of other students, where he has to decide, I want this to be my career. What am I willing to pay for that to happen? I won't comment on the fact that description of his experiences going to the school and becoming a sexual plaything, I won't comment on any kind of thoughts that crossed my mind when I was reading that, due to the fact that the main character's name is Harry Potter. That was just a coincidence. Although I think we can all agree it would have made the Harry Potter books a lot more interesting. But I can't really say that I got any pointers from this book. I read this when it first came out and thought it was a hoot. I read it again and thought it was a hoot. It's truly delightful. I think in the 1990s, there were a couple of people in New York society, in the arts world, who might not have liked this, because even now, back then I thought, is this kind of recognizable? Don't I know who this person is that the author's writing about? And now I still think it. A lot of those people aren't alive anymore, but still. And I don't think we're ever going to live to see an annotated version of The Sex Squad by David Lettick, but still, I really enjoyed it. I'm not sure that it will help me at all with Gilroy Rentboy, the thing that I'm writing for Camp NaNoWriMo. But Gilroy Rentboy is almost done. Camp NaNoWriMo is not the same thing as NaNoWriMo. You don't have to go to 50,000 words. You don't have to hold yourself to a strict limit of any kind. I think I get all that I need to get about the writing of sex scenes. I've now done a dozen of them for this book. I think I get what's going on. I'm never going to enjoy doing it. They're never going to be enjoyable. I can't make a good one. No one could make a good one. But I now know how to do it and what to do, how to think about it. And like I've always said about Gilroy Rentboy, there's a plot that I have in mind that doesn't have anything to do with that. I think I will just get on to that. So I didn't get any pointers from The Sex Squad, but I really enjoyed it. I highly recommend it. This next one, I think it was an ebook that was sent to me by one of you, and that was a gamble, considering all the stuff that I've said about this author. The author is Vladimir Nabokov, and one of you sent me an ebook of Speak Memory in a scholarly or an annotated edition, and I read it, and I enjoyed it. Large chunks of it, where I've never enjoyed anything by this author, except maybe some of his nonfiction work, his periodical work about essays and prefaces and that sort of thing. And oddly enough, I hate this author's fiction. And oddly enough, the gimmick that allowed me to like Speak Memory more this time than I did the last time I read it, decades ago, was to treat it as fiction. And when I did, I found myself enjoying large chunks of it. So whoever, I forget, it was a long time ago that one of you sent me this. I'm pretty sure it came from one of you. And whoever sent it, if you're watching, your gamble paid off. I'm not saying that my mind is open to Vladimir Nabokov. I've given this author more choices than you have hairs on your head. And it hasn't worked. His fiction lets me down every time. It is so bad. But there's a lot of Nabokov that isn't the fiction. I may go out. I think I probably will find the book-related volume that I have and go through all of it again. And maybe, who knows? I shouldn't be ruling out the fiction completely. That's the whole danger of having an open mind. Maybe 2023, unbelievably, will be the year when I reevaluate Vladimir Nabokov. Stranger things have happened. Then this next one is by Mark Hamer. We saw this on this channel. This is Spring Rain, A Life Lived in Gardens. This is a slim thing in every sense of the word, but utterly lovely. Any of you who are avid gardeners, you have got to get this book and read it. I am not an avid gardener. I have flirted with the idea, and I always back away because it's a lot of bother and because I know I wouldn't be any good at it at first. I would probably get better at it. But one thing that flirting with the idea of gardening has done for me, one unmitigatedly good thing it has done, is acquaint me with the vast body of gardening literature that's out there. Before I contemplated gardening, the only piece like that I knew was Onward and Upward in the Garden, which I loved. But I had no idea how much stuff was out there and how good it was until I started, naturally, because I'm a bookworm. When I contemplated the idea of starting my own garden, I went on a reading binge instead of going out, kneeling down in the dirt and doing trial and error. I started reading books, and I'm acquainted with so many things. This thing I will certainly keep. It's just a lovely thing. Any of you who are gardeners have got to have it. Then we have the new book by David Grann, the author of the Killers of the Flower Moon, which I really liked. This is his new book, The Wager. Totally different historical setting than Killers of the Flower Moon, and totally different kind of a sweep and feel to it. About a doomed ship, about a ship that has all sorts of horrendous adventures, goes off course and has all sorts of horrendous adventures. And I liked large chunks of this book. The hesitation that I'm feeling is that Killers of the Flower Moon felt crystalline. It felt like the author was in complete control of exactly the story that he wanted to tell. And this struck me as a little more ragged than that. Still really good. This is still an author that if you like modern popular history, you got to try this author. And then once you do, you'll eagerly anticipate every book. I liked this, but it struck me as unfocused in a way that earlier book was not. So I went out of it with a little bit of mixed reactions. Not true with this next book. This next book surprised me with how brilliant it is. This is an unequivocal recommendation, even though it is brutal as a subject matter. Just as brutal as the Alzheimer's book, only this is historical. This is by Benjamin Balin, and it is Bruno Schulz, An Artist, a Murder, and the Hijacking of History. This is about the writer Bruno Schulz, who was trapped by the Nazis along with everybody else and into a ghetto that became a prison, a ghetto that was totally dominated by the capricious murder lust of its Nazi overlords, who would sometimes just walk down the street shooting random Jews. No accountability, no law. You have to just hide in cellars. If you know somebody's on a murder trail because maybe their girlfriend slapped them or something like that, you have to just hide in cellars. Or when you can't, when you're showing up for your meager starvation rations, you have to hope that you're not shot in line or something like that. Gruesome environment. And in that environment, people did what they could to survive. And that usually meant ingratiating yourself with those Nazi homicidal monsters. And that's what Bruno Schulz did. In addition to being a very talented writer, he was also a talented artist. And he started drawing murals and private sketches probably for one particular Nazi officer. And that bought him a few extra rations. He was basically kept as a pet. It's absolutely soiling to read. Just a horrible, violent, humiliating, dark story that has no light to it. Because if you know anything about Bruno Schulz, you know what's coming, which is that he is, even though he is the pet of a Nazi officer, he is murdered out of hand. The Hijacking of History in the subtitle refers to the fact that there are many accounts of how he was murdered and when he was murdered and even by whom he was murdered. And we won't ever know for sure. The only glimmer of light anywhere in this, a brutal story, but the author tells it so beautifully. That's what I didn't expect about this book, is just how it reaches out and grabs you. Oh, how incredible it is in that regard. The only glimmer of hope is that, of course, Bruno Schulz did not die completely. We have some of his work. It's been in Penguin Classics, for Pete's sake, and Penguin European Classics or something. It's easy to get. You can easily get the two books by which he is best known. But whether you've read his work or not, you might want to try this book. Just be prepared, because that's a very slim glimmer of light. That's not a big glimmer of light at all. And then we'll finish up with a book that's also a very recent thing. The Rope Artist was, and this one is too. This was part of my final book depository book order. I have a copy of this. It's a May release in the United States, but I don't like the United States cover. Simple as that. I not only don't like it aesthetically, there are plenty of those where I don't like, but I also don't like it ideologically. It bothers me. The cover bothers me. So I saw the UK cover. It's infinitely better, so I got it. It's this. It's Close to Home by Michael McGee, his fiction debut. Story of the narrator of the book, who is a young man in the absolute hopeless, poverty-ridden dregs of Ireland, of the city, of urban life, a world surrounded by violence and by loser friends who want nothing more than a game or scam the system and don't think past their next court date, surrounded by drugs and alcohol, just surrounded by it, including in his own home. His mother and his brother are drunk all the time. They're high all the time. They're constantly thinking about that sort of thing all the time. There's a ritual that's repeated throughout this book of characters taking a little bag of cocaine, and just sort of discreetly handing it to each other, going to head to the basement or to the bathroom, and everybody knows what's going on. The narrator is part of that world. Gets locked up, has to go on community service, tries to get a job and hold it down, tries to, stay on the straight and narrow and earn enough money to get an apartment so he doesn't have to live with his mother. But in addition to that, he has a fugitive writing talent that he almost seems to have involuntarily, but seems to be good at it. Not in a miraculous way, not in a urban prodigy kind of way, but very much in a kind of a flower poking up between concrete. There is something that is in him that is not in any of his friends or his brother or his mother or any of her boyfriends or anything like that. There's a way for him to leave this world, or something that the outside world of this world would look at with favor, if he could just make something of it. And you're rooting for him the whole time, even though Michael McGee makes no effort to make his main character a saint or Superman in any way. He's a screw-up in a lot of ways. It's an incredibly effective scene. Just one of many. This book has so many effective scenes in it. There's an incredibly effective scene where he's working at a cafe and a regional manager comes to examine him, to give him an exam. And make me this drink. Okay, and then we'll take a look at it. Is it the standard that we want? Did you make it well? Then make me this drink. Now make me this drink. The district manager is not being a dismissive git. There are plenty of people like that towards our character in this book, but this guy isn't. Once that's done, and the results are uneven. Some of these are good, some of them are not. Well, all right, now we'll come over here to the table, sit down, and I will examine you on procedure. And that doesn't go well. And our main character is saying, if I'd had any warning, I'd have known. But you're sitting there yelling at him saying, well, you knew this was going to happen at some point. If you weren't busy just feeling sorry for yourself or getting drunk with your friends, you might have been better prepared. And when it's done, the regional manager says, well, I'm not sacking you, but this isn't acceptable. So we're going to do this again, and you're going to have to do better next time. And it's as simple as that. And that aspect of the outside world of our main character is just as present as the aspects of the outside world that want to just beat him down, or that don't care about him, or that want him to be, good time Charlie who doesn't care about his future. It's amazing when he mentions to friends of his who want to go on, a whole night bender, and when he mentions to them, I've got work in the morning, the scorn that they shows that they are just lost causes. And that's the key to this book, is that our main character is not a lost cause. So the whole course of the book, you are on the edge of your seat wondering if he's going to be lost anyway. Even though he's not a lost cause. He writes a story and submits it to a journal. It gets rejected, but in a good way. A thoughtful rejection. It's covered in notes from the editor who rejected it saying, this is really good. It's not right for us now. Please keep submitting to us. That is very realistic. Everything in this book is realistic. Without being maudlin and without pulling, an unexpected international inheritance out of thin air. This is remarkable. And it was an incredible debut. I don't know if this author will ever write anything else. This strikes me very much like Garth Riss Halberg's City on Fire. It strikes me very much as a book that the author had to write, that had been building for a long time. Usually debut authors who write something like that never write anything else. That was the only thing they were on fire to do. You give them a book contract, a little money, and some comfort, the respect of the writing world, and that's deadly to them. Suddenly they're not an outsider anymore, and they need to be that in order to write. I don't know if that's true with this author. And it's very cliche to say that you're eagerly awaiting the next book from a debut author, but I nevertheless am. I can't wait to hear from this author again. No mixed feelings when it comes to leaving this book, although a little bit of mixed feelings when it comes to recommending it. It's a sordid and a grim read. At every point when you expect that you know what direction it's going to take, it won't take that direction, and that will be unsettling for some people. I think that's one of the geniuses of the thing, is that it is genuinely unsettling. The way it gets under your skin. So, it's a strong recommend anyway. So there is my Friday reads. I know that was all one side of the spectrum. It was all stuff I've read recently. I don't do any reading now. at all. I read a book and then finish it, read a book and then finish it, read a book. And then, so I'm never reading. I'm never currently reading something. But I didn't do any of what's coming next. I'll do that next Friday. I'll make a point of doing it half and half. But I'd love to know what you're reading for this Friday. That's one of the funs too, is people catching up with each other. What are you working on this Friday as you head into the weekend, when I'm hoping you'll have plenty of put your feet up time? I'd love to hear it. But anyway, I'm going to wrap this up. This has gone on long enough, so I'll wrap this up for now. I will see you soon. Thank you, BookTube.